From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NOCO, a daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. It's Tuesday, March 19th. I'm Erin O'Toole. In many communities across Colorado, teens say they don't have enough to do after school. In Summit County, as local leaders work on a long-term plan for the future, young people are asking for more affordable indoor spaces. KUNC senior editor and reporter Lee Patterson joins us now. She sat down with local students to talk about why these types of hangout spots are so important to them and their well-being. Lee, welcome back to In the NOCO.
Hey there.
So Summit County is working on something called Blueprint Summit, the first new planning and zoning document of its kind in 15 years. And this time around, they're doing something different. They have been consulting with young people. You went to one of these meetings, Lee. What did you hear?
Yeah, well, these young people had a lot to say. This was a meeting in February, the Youth Empowerment Society of Summit meeting. There were maybe 10 or 12 teenagers there. And on that night, a representative from Summit County's planning department was there to basically survey them about what they want for the future of their county. Again, this is for that long-term planning document you referenced called Blueprint Summit. So these teens talked about, some of the biggies: housing, transportation, cost of living, and that they want more to do, more places to go outside of school and maybe jobs and home, of course. This is one of the teenagers who spoke up. Her name is Yoreli Baños Ruiz. She's 16 and is a student at Summit High School.
I said kind of like libraries and parks because like a lot of people who live in Dillon, they don't really have a hangout space, so they got to go all the way to like Silverthorne or Frisco or Breckenridge.
And this is James Rivera. He is also 16 and is also a student at Summit High School.
Just a really big thing for me is places for like kids to be that aren't like sports and they aren't like a job. If you're not doing a sport or if you're not working a job, you either go to the rec center or you go skate and skiing in the winter, but that's about it.
Other teens at the meeting talked about wanting affordable shops, not just expensive outdoor shops, like some of the outlet shopping that's available, or maybe even a new grocery store sounds good to them.
Trader Joe's.
That's fair.
So this is a major issue coming up in Summit County's blueprint process. Looking at some notes from the planning department and from their consultants about meetings with other kids in the county. Those notes show that young people are asking for everything from an arcade to indoor soccer fields to restaurants that are cheaper and open later. So they're thinking big.
Yeah. Lee, how much of an issue is this in other Colorado communities?
It is an issue everywhere to some extent. I would say that Summit County is a little bit unique because it's, this is a mountain community. Winters are long and snowy. Transportation can be really tricky if you don't have a car. So young people who rely on the bus to get around are just going to be more limited in what they have access to in terms of stuff to do outside of school. But again, this is an issue everywhere. So last summer, the city of Fort Collins opened a 1,500 square foot teen center. This had been years and years in the making, and young people and public health experts had been saying for a long time, hey, these kids need something to do. Again, last summer, I was listening in on a youth violence prevention meeting in Denver, and one education activist stood up and said, listen, you start to lose kids when there's nothing to do for them in their own neighborhoods. And he was making the case for some sort of commercial space, an arcade, a movie theater, et cetera. So the need for, safe, affordable third spaces is certainly an issue in many communities in Colorado.
Sure. Could you explain a bit more about the link here between having access to stuff to do and youth well-being?
Yeah. So I just referenced this concept called third spaces. The first two usually reference, for young people anyway, home and school. And the way experts describe third spaces, these are places to connect and to socialize, usually around some sort of shared goal or activity and with some level of adult supervision. This is even more important post-pandemic when kids were isolated for so long. So the link, to answer your question, between third spaces and youth well-being is that these spaces offer kids a place to connect that is outside of their social media and their phones especially. I would say, unfortunately, we do know that third spaces have been closing to some extent. There's some research looking at the time period between the beginning of the Great Recession and 2015, that these spaces are closing all across the country. And this can really have an impact on kids from lower income families. Heather Kennedy with the Colorado School of Public Health explains why here.
We know that young people who are experiencing economic deprivation, right? Their families maybe struggle to put food on the table, who have to work multiple jobs, may not have the same access to supportive non-parental adults and spaces of support particularly after school hours, right? Someone who can check in on them and how they're doing, as opposed to just going home to an empty home and perhaps getting on YouTube or something.
One of Summit County's commissioners told me that kids going home after school and sitting alone, waiting for a parent has been a problem there for a long time. There are not enough affordable childcare options. And there's insufficient funding for aftercare programs at schools. And we know that the cost of living in Summit County is extremely high. So that means that a lot of parents are working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and that leaves some kids alone after school by themselves.
Right. Well, so what happens next with Summit County's blueprint? Are there plans to build more of these third spaces for kids?
It's a good question. It's complicated. So the blueprint it's set to be finalized at the end of this year. And again, it's a long-term guide primarily for planning and zoning. This is not a binding document. This is kind of like recommendations. One of the county commissioners told me that they're hearing a lot about just livability issues from young people. Young people are saying, we don't know if we can stay here in the long term. So this is concerning for the future. Does that translate into more third spaces? That's really hard to say. Building is expensive and it's time consuming when you're trying to build a facility from scratch. But the county has been renovating with teens in mind. So one of their library branches recently reopened after being renovated, and it now has a dedicated teen space. So that is an example of how they're kind of retrofitting and renovating with young people in mind without kind of building facilities from scratch.
Lee Patterson, thank you so much for your reporting on this, and I really appreciate you coming on to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Erin.
Yesterday, hundreds of people were lined up before 6 a.m. to check out the state's very first Buc-ee's Travel Center that opened in Johnstown. So why is the Texas-based country store and gas station chain such a big deal here? We want to hear from you. Tell us what you love about Buc-ee's at kunc.org. Or you can send a text or leave a voicemail at 970-614-5323. Include your name and city, and we may use your comment in a future episode. That's 970-614-5323. That's it for us today here on In the NOCO. We'll be back tomorrow with more of what's happening in Northern Colorado. And we're excited to welcome the newest member of our team, producer Ariel Lavery. Robin Vincent is our executive producer. I'm your host, Erin O'Toole. We'll see you next time.